Welcome to the Legacy Leaders Podcast. Are you doing the best for your client to help them create their legacy? Are you creating a plan that goes far beyond finances to help people ensure that it becomes the driving force behind all decisions? On this podcast, hosts Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller will help you with growing your practice and your clients' peace of mind. Together, they bring the best and brightest minds to share with you how to help your clients develop their best legacy. And now, here are your hosts, Katie Beth and Stan.
Welcome to the Legacy Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Stepp, and today we have a very special guest, Mr. Bill Weintraub, here in the Los Angeles area. Bill, thanks so much for joining us today.
Nice to be here, Stephen.
All right. So, Bill, one of the things I always like to ask our guests is, how did you get into estate planning, and maybe a little bit about your own personal background in law school and all that kind of thing? What brings you here to begin with?
Well, I went to school at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, and I majored in accounting. And in those days, those were before the big days of Wall Street and investment banking. So very few of the students thought of that as a career path. Most of the successful students who were accounting and finance majors went on to law school. So to some extent, I followed the herd and went to law school. And I looked for a school that combination of things. I was at the time a New Jersey resident and could attend Rutgers for almost nothing in terms of tuition. And they had a very, very good tax program, which went well with my accounting background. So I'd always thought that if I practiced law, it would have something to do with accounting, and tax was sort of a natural area.
Got it. So you ended up at the University of Pennsylvania then for your law degree?
Then, well, I didn't go. I went to Rutgers for my law degree.
Oh, okay.
And Wharton undergrad, and then I actually thought of going to Wharton grad to get an MBA, but then I realized, I looked at the curriculum, I'd taken all the courses they offered that I wanted, and the ones I would have to take to get my degree were the ones that I didn't want to take as an undergrad. So all of a sudden that didn't seem as attractive, even though the MBA would have been, especially from Wharton, would have been a nice thing to have. But I had planned on practicing law and thought just adding another degree isn't going to make a difference.
Got it. I actually have a nephew who went to Rutgers, graduated just a few years ago. So excellent school, and you and Penn obviously good. So you must be a smart guy.
It helps.
Excellent. And so how did you end up in estate planning instead of tax or business law?
Well, estate planning is tax, very much tax driven, but I started my career at a boutique tax firm that specialized in tax controversy. And they were the premier controversy firm really for the West Coast. And so my early days, that's all I did was controversy, which was very much tax related. But I felt I had a big advantage because I understood a lot more about the tax law than most of the government lawyers who were really more process oriented. But I discovered that after resolving clients' tax problems, that most of them needed other things, other transactional work. Many of them needed estate planning. And the firm also did that too. So I made it my business to learn those other things, because in the course of dealing with a serious tax problem for clients, often developed a pretty close relationship with them. And so it was sort of a natural to help them with that next step. And so I just started to learn all of that, took the courses. I remember one thing in the early 1980s, there was a big change in partnership taxation, an area called special allocations. And everything changed, and anything anybody knew didn't apply anymore because the new regulations changed everything. So I went to a seminar and I sat there for a few hours and understood nothing. It was so over my head. In those days, you could buy tapes, and I bought a set of tapes of the seminar, and I listened to it over and over again, sort of like when I was a little kid and I would listen to records over and over, and you'd memorize everything. So after listening to it maybe for 7 or 8 times, and I could anticipate everything that they were going to say, it started to sink in, and I started to understand that. And that area of partnership allocations is a big part of a transactional practice. So with that and the estate planning, I sort of developed my practice to do both, which is a little bit unusual because many estate planning lawyers just function in that area and don't understand the business and other tax areas. And obviously, many lawyers that just specialize in transactions don't have the slightest idea about how business transactions should be considered for estate planning. And so, with all of that, the estate planning seemed attractive. It's also a function of, to some extent, you go where you want to go, but to some extent, you go where your clients take you. And I found many of the clients that I was with and many people I was meeting, estate planning is an easy area to market and people need it. And I developed that. And then I also learned that unlike most other practice areas, I had no adversaries. It was very pleasant not to have to fight against somebody or have deadlines and transactional deadlines or litigation deadlines. In estate planning, I view it as all win-win. I'm helping people. I'm doing what they want. I'm making things better. I'm making things work. I'm saving them money, and I don't have to fight against another lawyer. So it just sort of grew into that over the years.
I love it. You're actually the first person to bring up that point in all the meetings that I've had where there's no adversaries. There's no winning. You don't have to convince a judge or a jury that you're correct.
And it's very rare that there's drop dead deadlines that you have to have it done. I mean, occasionally, for health reasons, we have to move quickly, but by and large, it's a practice that you can manage, which is also a part of the practice where I try to distinguish myself from other lawyers, because I think in law school, they don't teach about how to play nicely in the sandbox, sort of. It's all about the adversarial process. But for clients who with estate planning, it's much more about the client experience. And I often joke that the only part of my documents that clients know whether it's right or not is how I spell their names. That's the one thing. If they see that and they see a mistake, it's big trouble because they lose all confidence. But in general, it's the whole experience from the first call, the first meeting, how you deal with them, approaching them, returning their calls on time, responding to their emails, being prepared for meetings, showing up. When I have a client coming to the office, it's not like when I go to the doctor's office, oh, the doctor will be with you. And 30 minutes later, you're taken to a waiting room. And sometime later, the doctor will show up. When I have clients come to the office, once my assistant goes to meet with them at reception, I'm standing at the conference room where they're coming in. I have their files. I've reviewed everything. I don't have to scratch my head and say, well, what are we here to talk about today? I'm prepared to go. And from beginning to end through the process, every step of the way, all my career, I keep thinking about how do I make the client service experience better, because most lawyers don't do that. And it's also how long it takes to complete the documents, the follow-up with the clients. Most lawyers send out the documents and I'm done. I don't do that. It's my job to make sure that they get done, that everybody reads them, understands them, eventually signs them, and takes the other steps they're supposed to take. And so every part of the process, and I talk to all the young lawyers here, that's very, very important. And if anyone has a better way to do it, I'm open to changes because it's an evolving practice. It's a business. It's the business part of the practice, but most lawyers don't think of it that way.
I think that's excellent and very professional. I know whether it's a doctor or a lawyer or anyone, you're nervous, you want to get things done, you want to get it done quickly, and you want to get it done right. And if the other person is a professional and they're there and they're ready, I'm like you, I hate going to the doctor. If I have to wait more than half an hour, I've been known to leave. I have white coat syndrome to begin with. So if they're going to keep me, all stressed out for an extra half an hour, I have been known to leave. So I think that's, fantastic. And it's respectful too. It's respect to, I'm sure that most of
that's how I look at it. They're coming to spend time. They're spending a lot of money. And I'm very mindful of that. And I'm very appreciative of that. And I've built my practice on being grateful and appreciative of the clients. Occasionally, there are some people who are not ideal clients that just difficult, and I try to avoid that because I can't please everybody. But most of the people that I deal with are good people. They're interesting. They have good life stories. I understand what they're trying to accomplish, and they appreciate that I'm able to help them. One thing, a lot of times clients will come to me and they say, when I went through this process in the past with some other lawyer, it took me 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 3 months to get my documents. And by the time they sent them to me, I didn't remember what we discussed. And they sent me this thick stack of documents, 3 inches thick of documents, and said I should review them and let them know if I want to make any changes. And I would laugh. I'd say, that's like if I'm building a home and the electrical contractor sends me his plans and asks me to approve them before he starts in. I wouldn't have the slightest idea what I'm looking at. So what I do, I tell everybody that whenever I send you a document, I will send along with that a plain English bullet point outline of all the things that we discussed that you decided upon that are in the documents. And the documents will match that summary. And I'll joke with them. I'll say, it'd be great if you read the documents, but I understand you may not. And if you do, you may have trouble following it. But you should at least read the summary. So I say, do me a favor. If you're willing to devote 1 entire minute, you can read through my summary twice, and you'll know what's in your documents.
Excellent. Excellent. So going back for a second, when you were talking about a lot of the clients originally that you had tax issues, and then that it turned out that in addition, they would obviously have some estate planning that would need to be done. Is that still the case, or are people now looking at you primarily or completely just as an estate planning attorney?
It's a good question in the sense that I still handle tax controversies, but very selectively. And I recently had a trial in the United States Tax Court on a very complicated issue that I'm convinced most other lawyers would not have figured out. And it involved potential tax liability for an individual of about $4 million. And it took a number of years before you get to trial because you work through all the administrative steps of the Internal Revenue Service. Then you have the trial. Then the way it works in tax court, you file your briefs after the trial. And several months after that, you get your opinion. Well, last week we got our opinion and we won. And so every couple of years, I get a case like that I'll take on where either I think I can resolve it quickly with summary judgment, or there's enough involved in the potential liability that I think I can win, that I will take it to trial. But I don't want to take on cases just to buy time, because some people say, well, can't pay the tax. Can you just keep it going, or take a long shot on something? It's because that's not very satisfying. But occasionally there are good, interesting cases. I just don't look for them the way that I used to. I'm not out there marketing myself. This is what I do. And when the right cases come along, I'm happy to take them on. Similar with transactional work, with a lot of clients, some come to me initially just for the business tax planning, not thinking that I also do estate planning. And if that's the case, they may be owners of a business and they want to bring on some young partner, and how to give them interest in the business, how to make it tax efficient, what if they leave, what if they compete, all of those things. And I help them with that tax planning. It may relate to their overall estate planning. It often does. But sometimes clients come first for the controversy or first for the transaction and then the estate planning. But probably 70% of the work starts out with the estate planning.
So I think you kind of covered this, but what would you say is nowadays your ideal client?
I'd say in general, most of my clients have substantial wealth. So the ideal client sort of needs overall family tax planning, meaning business tax planning, family estate planning, multiple generations, and is willing to follow along. It's hard for me when clients don't understand and don't try to understand and just sort of figure that I can wave a magic wand and solve all their problems. I like the clients who are knowledgeable, who sort of run alongside with me and help me help them, because they're interested, they understand their financials. I explain the concepts to them, they relate back to me, and they follow up with me. Sometimes it's difficult where clients, I'll meet with them, I'll send them documents, and I don't hear back, and I follow up and I still don't hear back. And it's very hard because when they finally come back, we're both starting over to some extent. So I like it when a lot of times there's clients that have other people in their business that help move the case along with me. They provide the documents. We're all working at it. And those are the good ones. It's very satisfying because we work together, we get the job done.
So the ones that are open to the team approach and to working with you and look at you as a partner in the process, it sounds like are the ones that you're especially happy with.
And a lot of times I'm working with their financial advisors, their CPAs, their insurance people. And as a young lawyer, I learned very early on that it's actually good business to be nice to the other professionals, not be arrogant as most lawyers are, to always volunteer. If somebody needs something, I would always volunteer. I'll do that. And for meetings, I didn't insist people would come to my office. It was made a difference to somebody else. I'd go to their office. I always try to make it myself user friendly. And one rule of thumb, and I try to teach this not only to my children, but to the younger lawyers here. I always say, tell me one good thing that happens when you show up late for a meeting. The answer is nothing good. What could happen if you show up early? One of my best clients for many years resulted because I'd go to a client's office for meetings, and I'd meet with sort of the mid-level financial people that I was working with. They were helping. And over the years, I'd go early, and we sort of became friends. And then one of those people left the company and had a wonderful business client opportunity and became one of the biggest clients that I ever represented. But all of that developed because I showed up early, showed an interest, developed a real friendship, and things came out of that. But none of that would have happened if I came racing into the meeting even a minute late.
Got it. No, I agree. I have a mentor whose son was trying to get a job to be a pro at a very prestigious tennis camp. Not that it has anything to do with law, but my mentor told and his son didn't think he had any chance at all at it. There were hundreds of really great tennis people from that area that all would be, I guess, ahead of him in line. And my mentor told him, he said, go in there, sit down with him, say, I will be the first one here. I will be the last one to leave. I will do everything that you ask as best as I can. And I can start, whenever you want. And lo and behold, the guy got the job.
And those are the traits that I look for in young lawyers, the people who are willing to do it, as I did when I was a young lawyer. When I had an assignment, I owned it, whatever it took, all night, weekends. There was no issue with that. I think there is a generational difference, and it's hard to find those people who have all of the things that you need. Some of them have all the academics, but they don't have the right work ethic. They don't have the right personality, or there's something missing. So it's hard to put all the pieces together to build a successful lawyer.
Got it. No, I agree. And I've had the same issue with several assistants along over the years as well. And I don't know if it's a millennial thing or something else, but it is hard to find people who are whatever level they're coming in are willing to just do whatever it takes and learn it from the ground up and be as helpful and always on time or early.
Yes.
And I think early is great because, again, one of your biggest cases, as you said, came from the fact that you were early, established rapport with another professional, and that led to, a great case for both of you. So when we were setting this up, you said a very interesting thing to me, and I always like to get to what special talents that an attorney might have. And I think you indicated that, and you expressed it well, I think already, but saying that basically you're very good. Your special talent is that you're able to simplify what can often be a very complex setup.
Yeah, the tax law is complicated. And I think the true art is communication, to explain to people how the pieces fit together, what works in general, and make it simple so they can understand what works for them. almost every client that I meet who's been with other lawyers will say, Bill, no one ever explained it like that to me. You made it sound so clear and so simple. And I don't think it's difficult. I just don't think a lot of people focus on putting themselves in the position of the clients. I often thought of it that when my daughter was little and I'd go out with her or walking, I'm walking her by the hand and I'm showing her things. I'm explaining it so she can understand it. And I would do the same things, not in a patronizing way with clients, but slow it down, draw the diagrams, don't use technical jargon because you can explain things without referring to technical jargon. And most people will understand it when you put it together like that. It's just a matter of making that effort. But I think there is a bit of a skill. I think some people just can't do it that easily. Part of what helped, there was a number of years I taught a graduate program at USC, and it was in a tax class. And I remember the first day of each class that I would take, it was nighttime. It was once a week, 3 hours. I had to prepare and stand up for 3 hours and deliver. And the very first class, I would say, when I went to law school, they used the Socratic method. And I was very frustrated because the professor would often say, is this income? Why is it income? When is it income? What type of income is it? Just keep asking questions. And then the thought was with the Socratic method, and people debate that, you eventually get to an understanding. And it is a way to get there. But I always viewed it that there's a lot of nuance that you'll lose. You'll spend a lot of time and people will lose interest before they really find out what they need to know. So I would say to the class, explain that what it was like for me. I said, I don't think that's an effective way to learn. You're working professionals, you're grad students. I am going to explain to you everything that you need to know. So when you see these issues in your practice, you'll be fully comfortable. You know every possible way to look at this. And in the course of doing that, I think that really helped me because I had to stand up and explain to 30 people once a week for 3 hours and make it clear so they could understand it. And I said, oh, and by the way, everything I'm telling you is what's going to be on the exam. There won't be anything that's not in this classroom. And I think that helped a lot. And I listen to a lot of other people. When I'm in meetings, I sometimes just have to button down, not say anything because I get frustrated because I know what they're saying is not resonating. And then when I finally get my chance and explain it, I can see the relaxation. People say, now I understand what's going on. But I always say to people at the end when they say, oh, Bill, this is so complicated, and I so appreciate that you made it so simple. And my response to that is, it really isn't complicated. It's just unfamiliar to you. If you tried to explain your business to me, I probably wouldn't follow a lot of what you're telling me. It would take me a while. And view it the same way. There's really nothing. It isn't astrophysics. It's not anything like that. It's not that complicated, but people make it more complicated than they need to.
Got it. So when working with your clients, what would you say is maybe some of the most common misconceptions about your work or about estate planning in general?
Probably the most common one is people think there's just a form document in my word processor, they said, Bill, why don't you print it? I said, I'm happy to do that. I'll bring it to my office. You'll stand in front of my keyboard. If you could show me which button to press, I'll print the document. But that's one. But there's other things. Lots of times clients, particularly in estate planning, come in, they've heard things, they think things that they think will be efficient. So a common one is people want in their documents to provide incentives for their children to work and produce income. I understand what they're trying to accomplish. Nobody wants a child to end up as a trust fund baby, as we call them, the people who are going to sit home and play computer games all day. But as I said to one client, so you've got 3 children and you want to match their income to give them incentives. And one of your children is something like an investment banker. The second one is a school teacher, and the third one is a stay-at-home mom. How well will your incentive program work for them? It's just the opposite. It doesn't accomplish anything that they want. Or another common one is they'll say, well, if I can't act as the trustee, when we're gone, I'll make my oldest child the trustee. And I always say, well, I can do that, but let me ask you a question. Do you think that your other children will understand that? Or might they be resentful that their older brother is making all these decisions for their assets and their wealth? And they sort of say, yeah, I sort of see your point, but no, I think they'll be okay. Well, then let me ask you another question. Are your children married? Yeah. What do you think their spouses are going to say to them? The spouses are going to say, how come your brother did that? How come he didn't consult with you? So a lot of times people come in where they think about things. They think it's easy. Oh, they think this will work. And I'll say to them, look, I can do that, but I'm not a scrivener. If you ask me to do something, I'm not just going to take down your order and deliver it up to you. If there's something that I know won't work or I believe there's a better way, I'm going to let you know that there's a better way to do it.
Got it. Probably the same people that want to come in and push the button on your computer, right?
Yeah. Yes.
But I appreciate that. So one of the interesting things always comes up for me, or a lot of times when I'm talking to the attorneys that we work with, is that they'll often have an interesting story of something going extremely well, like just in the nick of time they were able to get it done, or occasionally something where, not because of the lawyer, usually because of the client, where something went dramatically wrong or didn't happen in time. And I'm curious if you have a story in either of those categories.
I do. And the one I love to tell because it comes up, it's a good lesson. I had a client, a couple who was very, very wealthy. It was a second marriage. Husband had accumulated hundreds of millions. And he had two children from a prior marriage, but the second marriage was a real second marriage. They had been married 20 years for the second marriage. It was age appropriate. Everything was fine. And so he had his lawyers prepare a set of estate plan documents, which his wife gave to me to review, which I did. And she said, well, let's sit down and meet with my husband, his lawyers, and you can make your comments. So the estate plan it provided was pretty straightforward, 1/3 for each of the children and 1/3 for his wife. I said, well, that's pretty, and I talked to her. She was very happy with that. So the meeting I said to her husband, I went through with 1/3, that's fine. I said, just out of curiosity, if you were doing this today, which assets would you allocate to your wife? What would be her 1/3? Oh, that's easy. She gets the house, she gets these investments, certain art. I mean, he rattled it off quickly. And so I said, well, would you mind that if we create a trust today that has those assets in there so that if something should happen, we're all done? He was totally good with that. So all of the 1/3 she was to get was done as if he had died, but we put it into a trust. I said, you can change it if the two of you agree. He was fine. So the day that he died, she instantly had everything she was supposed to get. Now, some people say, what's the point of the story? Point of the story is if I didn't do that, his son was the trustee, didn't get along as well with stepmom as you can imagine. I know what would have happened. He would have said to stepmom, you can't afford that house on the water. We don't have the cash to maintain it. You're going to have to sell that. And by the way, we're very illiquid. We have to pay taxes. I don't know when I'm going to be able to get you money. And her life would have been miserable. She would have ended up in litigation, spending millions of dollars. But instead, after the grieving was done, she lost her husband. She woke up one morning and said, you have all your assets. You don't have to ask anybody for anything. You don't have to wait for any trust administration. You're done. And she realized what that meant. And it was very, very satisfying. So I often tell clients, particularly in families where there's a second marriage, separation is important. Everybody gets along when mom and dad are there or stepdad or stepmom is there. But once one is gone, it rarely hangs together well. And so separation is key. And that was a big one. And that worked out so well because when we were done, nobody realized we accomplished anything until they realized there wasn't the fight that would have otherwise ensued.
Yeah. No, so many things happen when somebody does die and that's why you go to a professional like you to make sure that things are taken care of. Another one of my mentors was telling me that their father-in-law said, I got everything taken care of. I've been to attorneys. I got his stuff. Everything's in my left-hand drawer. If anything ever happens to me, in there. And ended up, long story short, it took years or like 2 or 3 years of probating because he hadn't really done very much of anything. And he had gone to an online service to create his trust. And that was only 10 years old. And included in that was money went to a girlfriend, talking about a second marriage, to a girlfriend that wasn't even his girlfriend anymore. And he
Yeah.
had a life insurance policy where an ex-wife was the beneficiary, and they didn't get along at all. That's not what he would have wanted to
You're
have that.
cataloging all the things that go wrong when people don't pay attention. I did my documents to fine. Really? Well, you did them 20 years ago. Your circumstances have changed. You didn't title assets properly, and that becomes a family disaster.
Got it. So we may have touched on it already, but in working with your clients, what would you say is the biggest challenge that you have? What's the hardest thing for them to maybe understand about the whole process?
Well, as I said earlier, the challenge is to make sure they understand what I'm doing because it's not their everyday language and jargon. Because some people come in, they just say, "Well, I want to save estate tax. Just do it all. Just save it." And I say, I don't want to do that because you'll wake up one day and you'll see what you have, and now you'll understand it. And you go, "Oh, that's not what I wanted to do." So I try to lead people by the hand, take them along, make sure they understand what we're doing. Most people I can do that. There are some clients, some who are not native born in the US, have come from other countries, different culture. They speak the language, but they don't really understand at the same level. And that can be very hard to get them to understand what we're doing, why we're doing, how it works, what the consequences are, which is why it puts a lot of stress to me on making sure I do the diagrams, they can visually see it. I do the summaries. I sometimes will sit there and read through the summary with them. I'll say, here's exactly the steps. This is what will happen. Let's go through this. Upon your death, here's how it's going to work. And I draw the picture. Upon spouse's death, here's where everything goes. I draw the picture and here's where it all ends up. But it's a challenge, but it's something that needs to be done. Otherwise, people, I think they understood, but a lot of times they say, yes, Bill, but they don't really understand. So making sure they understand. But I do have a saying that I tell young lawyers, because misunderstandings in any area are easy, but misunderstandings in the legal area can be deadly. So I have a saying in that if it isn't in writing, it never happened. Because if I just tell the client, here's what's happening, I could say it 100 times, but if something didn't work out with the way they expected, well, Bill, you never told me that. Don't you remember we've discussed that 20 times? I've tried to emphasize. Oh, I'm sure if it was important, I would remember it. So the challenge a lot of times is I put it in writing, but I do it for two reasons in writing. One is to tell the story. So I send them documents, not only is the summary, every time I make a change, there's a narrative. We changed this, we did that. So that helps them understand. If I look at it 5 years later, I remember what we did and why we did it. And it's in writing, it happened.
Yeah. And it's very clear to me that not only the process and the whole idea that you're really, truly helping people get through a very complicated setup, whether it's easy or not. Is that what I'm guessing? Is that what you like best about estate planning? Is it the ability to help people in this way?
Well, that's part of it. What's really satisfying is the long-term relationships with people as they go through life and through their business adventures and their children and their grandchildren. And I become so much involved in so many aspects of their lives and have these relationships. I mean, I have some clients that have gone back, to the early 1980s that I've been with and did the work for their family, their children, been through them with all the ups and downs. And that's very gratifying that we stay together. Now it's not like that with everybody, but it is odd that I'll do work for somebody. I may not hear from them for 10 or 15 years. And out of the blue, Bill, remember me? You did a wonderful job 10 years ago. I need to update. And so that part is nice of having all those people out there that I never, on any given day, I'll say to my assistant, I don't know who's going to call today, but somebody out of the blue from the past, I will hear from, and they'll say, remember me, Bill, please, let's get together. I want to do something with you. And that part is very gratifying.
As I'm sure in most of the cases, it's probably good to update it, certainly more than every 10 years. So you're going to need to have that relationship with them so that 5 years later, when something does change, they'll remember to come back in and set things up properly.
Well, and what I do also as part of that whole process of client service, and I tell them this, I said, we're done now, and you're probably going to think you don't need to change in the future, and that's fine. Sort of the goal is this can last forever. Now, when people are younger, I'll say to them, your circumstances will change. At some point, things may need to change. But I send out a memo every year that reminds people of the things that they should review, things they should follow up, any major changes. I don't send a weekly email of every change in the law because people will be inundated and they won't pay any attention to that. But once a year, I send them, and it's similar. I make some changes if things change, but it's fairly similar. And I'll say, look, maybe the first 4 or 5 years you got my memo, my annual memo, you just toss it. But there'll come a point where you say, you know what? It has been 10 years. We should look at this to see if, what we need to change. But my goal is to help them with that so that it reminds them so they don't forget about it. And even if they want to go to another lawyer, that's not so much the issue, just that we don't have a circumstance you described where someone says, oh, yeah, I took care of it with a document that's out of date, 20 years old, with the wrong people, the wrong amounts, and the disaster. So if I can just every once in a while remind them, you should look at this. It is important. And it doesn't take a long time. And if you check it out, everything's fine. You don't need to do anything. That's wonderful. But that's all part of the process of trying to make it pleasant for the clients that, oh, this is good. Bill is being helpful.
Well, it's doing it your way and knowing the kids and knowing the other people involved in the family is a great thing because then they know where to go when God forbid somebody does die. They know to come to you directly and that you'll have all the information and be able to help them through what is obviously a difficult time for them to begin with. So the more that was done ahead of time and thought through ahead of time, the better.
It can be a difficult time, but it's less difficult than it would otherwise be if everything was not in order. And that's the part of it. And when someone calls and says, Mom passed away, what do we need to do? I say, we don't need to do anything right away. Take care of the family, go through your process. When you're ready, we'll sit down and we'll go through it. And if everything is set up well as it should be, then it's not, oh, we just buried Mom and Dad. Now we have this big problem. It's not that. It's okay. It's all laid out clearly. It's well thought out. And we just carry out the instructions. And hopefully, people say, boy, that was easy. I thought this was going to be a complicated process, but that was easy. That's the goal.
Well, that's because you did make it easy. So I think we're nearing close to the end of our time, but I just want to let you know, I do interview a lot of attorneys and some here in LA and throughout California. And I have to say, it's been very enlightening to speak with you. And I would encourage anybody in the Los Angeles area who wants your type of legal help, to definitely get in touch with either us at Legacy Leaders or directly with you. So if they want to reach you directly, what would be why don't you give us where the best way for them to reach you?
Well, it'd probably be if you contact me, I would show up on a Google search. You would search for, unfortunately, it's William Weintraub typically. But my firm's website, the name of the firm is Elkins, Kalt, then Weintraub. But the website's much simpler. It's Elkins Kalt, ELKINS KALT as in Tom.com. If you go to the website, it's pretty easy to find me there.
Got it. Or just directly looking you up. Normal spelling Bill or
yes.
Well, looking up, I guess it's William Weintraub.
When I write to the IRS.
Well, that's awesome. Anyway, I want to really thank you again for being our guest this week on Legacy Leaders. I want to thank all our listeners, as usual, for listening to the Legacy Leaders podcast. I've been your host, Stephen Stepp, and For more information, you can always contact us at Legacy Leaders or Bill Weintraub directly. Bill, again, thank you for being our guest and for making it a very meaningful podcast for our listeners.
Thank you. My pleasure.
You've been listening to the Legacy Leaders Podcast with Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller. For more information on them and the show, please visit pinnaclelegacylaw.com. If you like what you've learned today, do share the program with your friends and subscribe wherever podcasts are found.